State your name for the record, please.
Dickson.
All right, Mr. Dickson, I'll ask you to speak up so everybody can hear you, okay?
Yeah.
Where are you currently employed?
Pafford EMS in Tate County.
In Tate County is just to the north of here, correct?
Yes, sir.
And on December the 6th of 2014, where were you employed?
MedStat here in Batesville.
Were you doing the same? Do you have the same responsibility for MedStat that you have now for Pafford?
Yes, sir.
And what was that responsibility?
I was the EMT of the ambulance.
And just so the jury is aware, what is the EMT of the ambulance? What are your job duties?
Assist the paramedic in his roles and responsibilities, handle certain things. I can do basic medical skills, but not as much as a paramedic. He's the primary care provider on the ambulance.
And are you also the driver?
Yes, sir.
So on December 6, 2014, were you the EMT that responded to Heron Road?
Yes, sir.
And who was the paramedic on board with you?
Josh Perkins.
And I believe a run report was done for MedStat, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Who prepared that report for MedStat?
Josh did.
Okay, so you did not prepare a report. Josh prepares it for you?
Correct.
I'm going to ask you, when you arrived on the scene at Heron Road, tell the jury what you saw as you were coming in.
So, of course, there's going to be fire trucks there. There was a few fire trucks there. A couple personal vehicles. I guess first responders showed up in their own vehicles.
Is that typical?
On certain calls, especially far out in the county.
What was this particular call in reference to?
We got the call as a car fire and a possible burn patient.
All right, go ahead.
So when we pulled up on scene, I parked beside one of the fire engines. When I arrive on scene, I try to look for possible patients. I don't pay attention to, outside. That's not my responsibility is to pay attention to, such as a car fire. So I didn't notice that right away. When I got out, I saw a couple firemen behind the fire engine kneel down beside what turned out to be the patient.
When you saw the patient, what was your first thought?
That we need a helicopter.
Why was that?
Helicopters used for severe patients. Since we're in a rural area, helicopter gets them to where they need to be quicker than what we can.
Describe her condition to the jury as you saw it.
When I first laid eyes on her, her condition was very poor. She was burned. From the parts of her body that I saw first was completely burned. I didn't notice any part of her body that wasn't burned.
Describe the area of her mouth.
Her lips were real leathery, almost charred. Her face was third-degree burns. Eyelashes were gone. Eyebrows were gone. Her hair was a singed mass.
When you said you knew immediately you needed a helicopter, who do you relay that information to?
I relay it to my partner, Josh, make sure because ultimately it's his decision.
Who got a look at her first, you or Josh?
I don't recall.
Now, did Josh ultimately call for the helicopter?
He told me that he is okay with that decision, so then I went to the ambulance to get on the radio to tell our dispatch to call the helicopter.
Well, let me ask you about, everybody's got their roles, correct?
Yes, sir.
Your particular role as the EMT is to assist the paramedic, is that
correct?
And I assume normally you can do that on the ground with the patient?
Yes, sir.
In this particular case, was there another person out there that could also assist in that manner?
It was.
Who was that?
Casey Austin.
And what is Casey Austin to your knowledge?
A paramedic.
So we have another paramedic out there for help?
Correct.
At some point, did Casey help Josh? Did Casey assist Josh with the body?
Yes, sir.
And where did you go?
When I went to call for the helicopter, I got into the back of the ambulance and started getting a sterile burn sheet to take to my partner, and also to prepare for when the patient was brought to the back of the ambulance.
So you stayed in the ambulance?
After I took the sterile burn sheet to my partner and then went back to the ambulance to start preparing for the patient's arrival.
When you have a burn victim, what do you do inside the ambulance?
Normally, we have to start IVs, keep the patient very warm, The sterile burn sheets are used to limit infection risk and provide oxygen.
Did you do anything to the temperature controls inside the vehicle?
I did. I turned the heat all the way up.
And tell us how that works in an ambulance. Is it different than a car?
It is. You have one dial that has numbers on it, 65 to 85, and you just pick the temperature that you want.
So the heat was running?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever get out of the ambulance to help them load
No, sir.
the lady in?
No, sir.
Okay. Tell us what you did once she was loaded into the ambulance.
Once she was loaded in, I turned the oxygen tank on, hooked up the oxygen mask. Also handed Josh, my partner, the IV setup, the IV supplies that you need to start an IV with.
And did Casey also get in the ambulance with you?
Yes, sir.
So you had 2 paramedics inside the ambulance?
Correct.
Did anybody else, what I call poke their head in or come in the ambulance?
They did.
Who was that?
Daniel Cole.
And was Daniel trying to talk to the young lady?
He was.
What was he saying?
Asking her, who did this to you?
And you said she had her oxygen on, is that correct?
Correct.
Where were you sitting?
I was at the head of her.
Okay. Was she able to respond at all?
She was.
And what did you hear her say?
The first time she responded, couldn't hardly hear her because of the oxygen mask and all the noise that was in the ambulance. So we had to ask her a couple times. Daniel was poking his head through the door, and I was leaning down to talk to her in her ear, just relaying what he was asking.
Describe her voice at that point.
Raspy. You could tell it was dry. You could tell her mouth was burnt, trouble speaking.
So was she speaking like me and you are right now?
No, sir.
Did you have trouble understanding what she said?
Yes, sir.
Times.
I did.
Ultimately, I believe Josh put in his report, and you thought you heard a name, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what name did you believe you heard?
Eric.
Out of all the time y'all were in the ambulance, how many words do you think you were able to make out?
Maybe 3.
Outside of Eric, what were the other 2 words?
Thirsty and cold.
And in regards to her saying thirsty, was she able to enunciate that?
No, sir. You could make out that it was a 2-syllable word that sounded like thirsty, and I then asked her, are you saying you're thirsty? And she acknowledged with a head up and down.
When you say thirsty, your tongue hits the top of your mouth, is that right?
Correct.
Was she struggling in that capacity?
Correct.
What did thirsty sound like to you?
Thirsty.
And what other word were you able to realize?
Cold.
Is that typical of a burn patient?
It is.
Your Honor, I tender the witness.
Croft?
Good afternoon, Mr. Dickson.
Good afternoon.
So you were the driver that day?
Correct.
Okay. And do you recall from memory what the at-scene times were, what time you got to the patient who would have been Miss Jessica? Do you recall that from memory?
Not from memory. I had to look over.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach the witness
You
to
may.
refresh his recollection? What does that appear to be to you that's before you?
Patient care report.
Okay. If you will, look sort of midway the page, and it talks about response times and mileage. You recognize that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And if you will, what time does it appear that you arrived at the scene?
2029.
Okay. And so tell me what 2029 is.
8:29
That would be 8:20.
p.m.
Okay. PM. Okay. And the next thing would be what time did you arrive at patient?
20:30. or 8:30 p.m.
8:30. Okay. Then the next time would be you departing. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. What time would that be?
20:42 or 8:42 p.m.
And then it has arrival at destination. What would that be?
20:44 or 8:44 p.m.
Okay. So basically, you got there at scene about 8:29. A minute passed, correct? When you got to Miss Jessica, which would be 8:30.
Correct.
And then departed about 12 minutes after that, correct?
Correct.
And then looks like it was a little bit longer going from when you departed to probably the arrival at the church.
Correct.
Correct. And at the time that you were with Miss Jessica in the ambulance, you did hear her use the name Eric.
Correct.
I attended the witness, Your Honor.
Redirect.
No further questions, Your Honor. I would ask Mr. Dickson be finally released.